The narrative commences with the depiction of a charred hospital building where firefighters valiantly battled the flames and undertook a daring rescue mission to save a child's life. While attempting to console the child, they inquired about the whereabouts of their mother, yet the child remained silent. The story then shifts its focus to Shani, a young girl who was seated by a small pond near her home. Suddenly, an eerie voice emanated from the water, prompting her to approach cautiously. As she peered into the depth, a mysterious hand emerged from the water, seizing her face and forcibly submerging her in the pond, and the sinister hand reappeared to snatch Shani's cat from the street, dragging it beneath the surface, resulting in its demise. The narrative then advances a few days, portraying a group of students engaged in revelry. Among them is Beth, who is visited by a friend, and they retreat to a private room to discuss Shani's tragic demise, as they were all friends. During their conversation, Beth's friend receives an unexpected call from Shani's number, featuring an unusual ringtone resembling a truck horn. Answering the call, they discover a haunting voice message that leaves her screaming in sheer terror, bewildered and deeply concerned. A detective is subsequently summoned to the police station to identify a corpse, which turns out to be the detective's own sister. To the detective's astonishment, a piece of candy emerges from the deceased's mouth, reminiscent of the candy that had come from Shani's mouth during her final moments. This ominous connection between the deaths is noted. 2 days later, Beth and her friend are seen at college. During a class, Beth's friend begins experiencing hallucinations, witnessing surreal and frightening occurrences, such as imagining a scorpion on Beth's hand. After class, Beth invites her friend for coffee, but she declines, opting for the solitude of the library. As the library closes, Beth's friend's hallucinations intensify, with malevolent apparitions haunting her every perception. Overwhelmed by fear, she calls Beth, who reassures her and promises to arrive in 2 minutes. However, her terror escalates, causing her to lose her balance and tragically fall from a height, colliding with a passing train and succumbing to her injuries. Beth arrives at the scene just as the tragic accident occurs. Upon witnessing this grim incident, she also perceived an eerie, unfamiliar sound. As she approached her friend's lifeless body, an inexplicable occurrence unfolded. A piece of candy emerged from her friend's mouth. Bewildered, Beth instinctively checked her phone, noticing that the contact number on it was fluctuating, as though someone were attempting to change it. Following this unsettling event, a conversation transpired between 2 college girls discussing the deaths of Beth's friend and Shani, which seemed to have occurred in a similar fashion, both tied to mysterious phone calls. When Beth's male friend heard about this, he became increasingly agitated, dismissing the notion as baseless and labeling it nonsense. Beth, however, remained resolute in her belief, asserting that her friend's death was indeed linked to a phone call. In a sudden turn of events, Beth's male friend too began experiencing hallucinations, witnessing the presence of scorpions, leaving him unsettled. In response, he abruptly departed from the scene, with Beth trailing behind him. As they conversed, he disclosed that he had also received a peculiar call with a time discrepancy that puzzled him. Suddenly, he perceived a sinister figure, causing him immense fear, and he hastily retreated. Beth attempted to reach out to him, for he had left his mobile behind. When he returned to retrieve his phone, he uttered something akin to the voice message he had received, and an explosion ensued, resulting in his demise. During this calamity, Beth too heard an eerie voice. In the wake of these tragic events, Beth sought out a female police officer, sharing her concern that 2 of her friends had died unexpectedly after receiving ominous phone calls, accompanied by the emergence of candy in their mouths. Although the police officer listened attentively, she remained skeptical. Nevertheless, the detective from the initial morgue scene, who had encountered similar circumstances involving his sister's death and Shelley's, approached Beth and affirmed his belief that these phone calls, candies, and deaths were interconnected. He provided Beth with his contact information and offered assistance, promising to share details of the phone calls received by the deceased. Upon returning home, Beth encountered her roommate Annie, who was fraught with fear, as her number had also been stored in the male friend's phone, indicating that she might be next in line for such a call. In an effort to console Annie, Beth removed the batteries from both of their mobile phones, assuring her that they wouldn't receive any calls. However, during the night, a haunting ringtone pierced the silence, emanating from Annie's mobile phone. Despite its lack of a battery, this call arrived 2 days later and caused Annie to cough, as the voice message contained the sound of her own scream. The night passed in tension, But as morning dawned, the two girls decided to break Annie's mobile phone. Shortly thereafter, a man arrived to meet Annie, the proprietor of a live TV show. He had learned of the recent call and wanted to invite Annie to his program with the intention of broadcasting her experience live. By doing so, he hoped to capture the enigmatic events surrounding her impending death for a wider audience and potentially intervene to save her life in front of the viewers. However, Beth firmly opposed this idea and returned home with her roommate. The roommate suggested that they should consider the man's offer, as he might be able to assist them, but Beth remained steadfast in her refusal. The following morning, Beth discovered that her roommate had vanished, leaving a note explaining her departure to visit her parents. Subsequently, the detective approached Beth and revealed that he had obtained records of the phone calls, unveiling a pattern wherein each deceased person had made a call to the one who died subsequently. For example, his sister had called Shelley, who then called Beth's friend, leading to the train accident fatality. Intriguingly, all these calls had revolved around discussing the circumstances of their own deaths. The detective disclosed that a woman who was unwell had called his sister. He intended to investigate this woman's home to uncover the truth, and Beth decided to accompany him. Upon arriving at the woman's residence, the detective initiated a thorough search and discovered a video CD recorded with a small camera typically used for child monitoring. The footage depicted the woman's two daughters, with the elder named Annie. However, the detective failed to locate the small camera itself at the scene. Instead, he came across an inhaler resembling a breathing aid for patients, operated by a pump mechanism that emitted a voice when pressed. Hearing this voice, Beth was deeply alarmed and confided in the detective, recalling that she had heard the same voice at the locations where her friend and the male friend had met their tragic ends, even though there had been no visible source for the voice. Further investigation led the detective to conclude that the older daughter of the unwell woman, Annie, had suffered from a chronic breathing condition, and that her younger sister had sustained recurring injuries of various kinds, such as ingesting harmful substances or having objects lodged in her head. The mother had taken them to the hospital multiple times for treatment. Beth then pieced together the puzzle, deducing that the unwell woman suffered from a mental illness that led her to harm her own children intentionally. She manipulated their ailments, seeking attention and care for them while ensuring they remained vulnerable. Additionally, Beth discovered that, at the hospital, the inquiring nurse who questioned the woman about her daughter's conditions was none other than the detective's sister, whose death had profoundly affected him. Subsequently, Beth watched her roommate appear on television during a live show organized by the TV show host to broadcast her impending ordeal. Disturbed by the unfolding events, Beth and the detective rushed to the church where the live broadcast was taking place. During the show, the roommate began experiencing hallucinations and encountered a malevolent entity, resulting in her demise when it stifled her breath. The room was plunged into darkness, and when the lights were restored, Beth found her roommate lifeless, with a piece of candy emerging from her mouth. Beth then received a call from her deceased roommate's number, which had been recorded the previous night at 7:55 p.m. Upon answering the call, she heard a voice message containing her own screams, signifying that she was the next target for the mysterious deaths. To safeguard her, the detective decided to stay with her at her home. As the next evening approached, both were anxious, knowing that at 7:55 p.m., Beth's life would be in grave danger. In the meantime, the detective managed to track down the younger sister of the mentally ill woman, Annie's sibling, who was residing in an orphanage. This discovery revealed that the girl was the only surviving relative left in the world, and marked the individual encountered at the beginning of the story, which firefighters saved her from the hospital. These two individuals, they inquired about her mother initially, but she did not respond. When the firefighters questioned whether her mother was in the hospital, there was an unexpected interruption. From the girl's hair, a sudden sound of a truck began emanating, the very same truck that used to be her ringtone. Despite this unusual occurrence, Beth and the detective decided to leave the scene separately. Beth intended to gather information about the hospitalized woman who was presumably Annie's mother. As Beth was leaving, her attention was drawn to the window of Annie's sister, behind which stood a ghostly figure. This sighting prompted Beth to reconsider her plans and visit the hospital where Annie and her younger sister had been treated. She informed the detective of her intentions before making her way to the hospital. Upon arrival, Beth encountered locked front and back doors. However, the back door mysteriously opened by itself, allowing her to enter. Inside the hospital, Beth began searching for clues but was suddenly attacked by an ominous force lurking in the darkness. She let out a piercing scream in fear. Just in the nick of time, someone saved her life, and she hastily fled from the area. Beth reunited with the detective, and together they attempted to leave the premises, only to discover that all the doors were locked. As they entered a room, the malevolent force struck again, lifting the detective into the air and then violently tossing him out of the room. The detective was left severely injured and unconscious. The door to the room was also locked. Beth noticed a small ventilation pathway and quickly made her escape through it. During her escape, her mobile phone kept receiving constant calls. She stumbled upon a charred corpse holding a mobile phone, which was identical to her own. Beth grabbed the phone and destroyed it, causing a reaction from the corpse, though it did not harm her. Instead, the corpse uttered, "Forgive me." Subsequently, the detective arrived at the scene and realized that Beth had survived. The police soon arrived, rescuing them both. Beth explained to the detective that she was brought to the hospital not to be killed, but to have her life saved by the burnt corpse. The detective decided to visit Ellie's sister at the orphanage, but she was asleep. He discovered a hidden camera disguised as hair, which had been used to monitor the child. Upon reviewing the footage, the detective learned that Ellie, not the child's mother, had been tormenting and harming her younger sister in various ways. Ellie had derived enjoyment from inflicting pain on her sister, even going so far as to cut her hand. One day, their mother discovered Ellie's cruel act and locked her in a room, leading to her eventual heart attack and death. The child had kept the abuse a secret because Ellie would give her candy after hurting her. Back at home, when Beth was alone, Ellie's vengeful spirit, invisible to Beth, had haunted her until the detective's arrival. He shared his findings with Beth, confirming that Ellie's malevolent spirit was responsible for the deaths. Ellie's mother, the burnt corpse, had saved Beth's life. As they continued their conversation, a knife suddenly emerged from the door's hole, injuring the detective. Ellie's evil presence manifested once more, determined to kill Beth. However, Ellie's mother intervened and saved Beth. The detective's condition was critical, and he passed away, a piece of candy emerging from his mouth, automatically dialing the next victim's phone number.